Now, so far we've agreed rational acceptability is a function of two things. The rational acceptability of an argument is a function of two things. That is, the logical connectedness between the premises, the reasons, and the conclusion. That is, if it has a high degree of logical connectedness, that helps, that gets it on its way, it's required for it to be rationally acceptable. And then the second thing is support by the evidence. Now notice, we would like to say that there's a connection between truth and evidence, or certainly between rational acceptability and evidence. That is, the reason you should accept the rationally acceptable argument is that it's going to get you to the truth of the matter. But let's consider, it's not that simple, and let's consider an example that's going to explain why. The earth does not revolve around the sun. Is it true? No. Right? Now, but the other question is, because it's not true, does that mean that the evidence always undermines that belief, the belief that the earth doesn't revolve around the sun? Right? It's not true. So if it's not true, does that mean that the evidence always counts? The evidence that you have always counts against it. Let's think of another example before we jump to any conclusions about it. There are atoms. Right? You learn that in your science classes, your chemistry classes. There are atoms. Is it true? Yeah. Well, does that mean that the evidence always supported it? First one, the evidence, because it's false, the evidence always undermines it. The second one, because it's true, the evidence always supports it. Well, think about this. What evidence did they have about 6 and 7 in the Middle Ages? Well, in the Middle Ages, they didn't know that the sun was at the center of the solar system and that the earth revolved around it. Remember, they had a different conception. That is, on their conception, and they got this from ancient Greece, from Aristotle, and from a Greek astronomer named Ptolemy, the earth was regarded as the center of the universe, and the sun revolved around the earth, not vice versa. So the evidence that they had about that in the Middle Ages supported the claim that the evidence does not revolve excuse me, around the sun, despite the fact that it was false. So the evidence actually supported it that they had back in the Middle Ages. Similarly, back in the Middle Ages, despite the fact that we're now pretty sure that, and everybody agrees that it's true, that there are atoms, that the basic components of the universe, of the material things of the universe, are these atoms. In the Middle Ages, if somebody said that the things were made up of these little tiny particles, these solid objects were mostly space, the way the atomic theory of science claims, they'd say, wait a second, there's no evidence. It's a solid thing. There aren't these little particles that make up a desk. There aren't these little particles that make up a tree. So all the evidence that they had in the Middle Ages went against, did not support the true proposition that there are atoms. Similarly, look at the evidence we have today. Notice the evidence that we have today turned it all around. That is, we found out that the earth, in fact, does revolve around the sun, so it's false. And we found out that there are atoms. So notice, truth and evidence are sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes diverse. Sometimes we have good evidence for thinking that things are, that for belief, for certain beliefs, and they end up not to be true. And sometimes we don't have any evidence, any good evidence. In fact, all of our evidence goes against a certain claim, only for us to discover that it is false. So we have to be very careful in evaluating things and understanding the difference between having support from the evidence that we have and it's being true.